Trauma is a hot topic today. In this episode, we'll find out what trauma is, how it affects you, and what you can do about it. If you're interested in finding out if trauma is affecting your life or the lives of those close to you, stay tuned. Janine and I will be talking with Rachel Rauch, a doctor of naturopathy, who will give us the lowdown on trauma.
Welcome to the Jesus People Sisterhood podcast, a place where Christian single women age 50 plus connect. I am your host, Janine Jordan, a Christian confidence coach and leadership mentor in Alberta, Canada.
And I'm your co-host, Ellie McCormick, a Christian longevity coach and mentor in the USA. Being single women over 50, we know what it's like to feel overlooked, to have unrealized dreams, to experience the challenges of singlehood, and to be concerned about what our future will look like. We couldn't find anything online for single Christian women over 50, so we created Jesus People Sisterhood just for you, a place where sisters encourage and empower one another through the last third of life, because you are a treasure trove of wisdom and of exceedingly great value. This is an authentic community, a supportive family, with other women on the same journey where Jesus is the center of it all. Here you will find real talk, real community, and real sisters.
Join us as we discuss building relationships, whole health, and growing spiritually. We'll review helpful books and articles, chat with guest speakers, share success stories, and have some laughs along the way. So grab your favorite beverage and we'll get started. Hello, and welcome to the Jesus People Sisterhood podcast. In this episode, we are interviewing Rachel Rauch. Rachel is a doctor of naturopathy and a certified integrative mental health professional. Rachel is a keynote speaker with over 20 years of experience. She has worked with thousands of women from all over the world to achieve balance in their mood and hormones. Rachel's expertise is a result of extensive research on behalf of her clients, combined with her own journey of discovering the correlation between nervous system health and trauma and chronic stress. Rachel is on a mission to help women restore peace and calm in their bodies by utilizing her signature program, Wholeness Restored. Rachel's contact information and more can be found in today's show notes.
Rachel, is great to have you here with us today, so let's dive right in.
Thank you.
Please tell us, what is trauma and how did you get interested in the subject?
Oh, that is a good question. So the definition, my favorite definition of trauma actually comes from Dr. Amy Apijan, if I'm saying her last name correctly. And she would define trauma as too much, too fast, or too little for too long. So let me elaborate on what that means. So too much too fast is what we would often think of as trauma. You know, it's the car accident, the sudden death of a loved one. It's the abuse. It's those things, you know, war, those things that we typically associate with a traumatic event. It's too much, too fast, and it overwhelms our body. Now, two different people can go through the same trauma, the same experience, I should say, and one will be traumatized and one will not. Okay. And let me back up and give you the other half of the definition, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. So too much, too fast, or too little for too long. And too little for too long, think of it as often it maybe is associated with chronic stress. So it's the caregiver, you know, taking care of ailing parents, or maybe it's a foster parent of troubled teens, or it's the single parent. It's somebody that does not have the support they need while they're going through a very stressful time. Okay. And that can also become traumatic for the body. And either way, whether it's too much too fast or it's too little for too long, it impacts the nervous system, which then impacts all the rest of our health. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me jump back to two different people can go through the same event, and one can be traumatized and one not. And the best example I can give you is a number of years ago, my family, so my siblings, my parents, all my nieces and nephews, we were visiting this state park in Ohio, and we were traipsing down a trail, and my brother was leading the way, and then I had a couple of nephews. At that time, I'm going to say they were probably maybe 7 and 10, is my guess, right behind him. And unbeknown to any of us, there was a log in the ground that ground yellow jackets had created a hive in. And my brother stepped on it, which disrupted it. And then my nephews stepped on it next, which brought the yellow jackets out in a swarm. And I'm a ways back on the trail with some of the other kids, so I was not there at the moment when it happened. But all of a sudden, down the trail towards us come these screaming boys. And I will never forget the look of terror in their eyes as their entire heads are covered with yellow jackets. And they are running as fast as they can, and they're obviously very terrified, and it is obviously a very traumatic moment as our entire family attempts to get off this trail and get these yellow jackets off and get back to a place of safety. 2/3 of our group was stung, the vans were locked, and some of the people with the keys were trapped on the other side of the stream, on the other side of the yellow jackets. It was just a very traumatic experience. Once we all got back to our hotel and we were eating lunch, I noticed that my 10-year-old nephew could not sit still. He just kept pacing around the room. He couldn't hardly eat. He just could not settle down. My 7-year-old nephew was just fine. He chowed down his food, and before the afternoon was over, he went swimming. My 10-year-old nephew was too scared to get into the water because maybe it would hurt, where he'd been stung. 7-year-old, just jumped right in, and he ended up sticking his finger into a wasp nest on the playground and got stung again. He was not affected. I mean, obviously he cried when he got stung, but he was literally not affected by the experience. But my 10-year-old nephew was a mess from it. So in that situation, they went through the same event, but one boy was traumatized, one was not. But that 10-year-old that was moving all around and couldn't sit still, what he was actually doing is he was responding. He was allowing his body to deal with that trauma. Okay. So you probably have seen, or you've seen movies or wherever where you see a predator attack another animal. Okay. And the animal that's being attacked will fall over as if they're dead. I mean, they look dead, they act dead, they're not moving. And hopefully the predator will just lose interest and wander off. Okay. And after a little bit, the hunted animal will jump up, he'll run off a little bit, and then he will shake himself like crazy. What he's doing is he's discharging all of the energy that was mobilized from the trauma. My 10-year-old nephew was discharging all of that adrenaline and all of that mobilized energy from the traumatic event. That's why he couldn't sit still. When we go through trauma, whether it is a short-term event or something more chronic, okay, if we can't allow our bodies to respond the way that they need to, it becomes stored in our tissue. And this is what happens for a lot of us. Okay, because we don't have the opportunity to mobilize our bodies. Maybe it just depends on the circumstances, whether it's something in our childhood or it's something as an adult. We don't always have that ability. And so our bodies begin to store that trauma deeply in our tissue, our organs, the different places in our body, and it will hold it until eventually it becomes too much. And then it will begin to develop symptoms telling your body, hey, I need some help. I can't keep doing this. And those symptoms come up as hormone issues or anxious feelings or low mood or poor sleep or, any of these things that we deal with as adults.
So what you're really saying is there's an event that is traumatic, but the trauma is really if we don't release that, we don't discharge that energy from the event. So the
Right. It's
trauma
how
is
we perceive.
actually the reaction to that event, right?
Yes, it's how we perceive it, and then the inability to discharge it properly.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
So you talked about some trauma symptoms. Could you just state those again and then maybe give us the most common, or is there the most common, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people think of trauma and they automatically think of like PTSD or something of that nature. Okay, that's the common association with trauma. What most people don't recognize is that you can hold trauma in your body and it can show up in other ways that is not connected with PTSD. We think war veterans and PTSD, or we think childhood abuse and PTSD. Okay. So, first of all, we equate trauma as being something horrible that only happens to a few people, instead of recognizing that almost all of us have experienced times of trauma. Okay. It doesn't mean that everything in life is traumatic, but we almost all go through times of trauma. Okay. And for some people, that's going to show up in symptoms on the spot. Like you go through something very, very stressful and then you can't sleep. Okay. Or, you go through something very difficult and you become very fearful. All right. Sometimes this happens right on the spot. Okay. But other times it is buried in our nervous system and is buried in the tissue in our bodies. And it can be years before it comes out. And it will then come out as hormone issues. Okay. So just about any symptom that is associated with like perimenopause or menopause can, in some situations, be linked back to trauma. And let me explain why, because this light bulb moment, occurs with my clients when I begin to explain this. So when you've experienced trauma, whether it's something that was too much too fast or too little for too long, okay, and that's stored in your body decides in that moment that it is not going to allow you to be harmed or put into that vulnerable situation again. It is going to do everything that it can to keep you safe. So your body, not necessarily your brain, okay, your body becomes hypervigilant. Let me give you an example that's not related to trauma, but I think we can all relate to. Okay. If there's a hot burner on your stovetop and you touch that burner, you're going to pull your hand off, your finger off without ever thinking about it. If you are driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off, you hit the brakes and you swerve without ever thinking about it. You're not thinking, oh no, they just cut in front of me. I should hit the brakes. Now I should pull the wheel to the right or the left. You're not thinking that. Your body did it all. Okay. That's what happens in our bodies, even after traumatic events. It can be years later, but your body is saying, I am going to keep you safe. So at whatever costs, I am going to stay hyper alert, hyper vigilant, and always be watching everything to make sure that you're safe. That requires a tremendous amount of adrenaline to maintain that. Cortisol and adrenaline. Your body first produces that adrenaline. It then follows up with that cortisol. Eventually, if your body cannot maintain these elevated levels of adrenaline and cortisol to keep you hyper aware, okay, of your environment, it will begin to pull from your progesterone levels, which will create an imbalance of progesterone and estrogen. Sometimes we are fine dealing with that imbalance in the younger years. But menopause, or that transition, perimenopause, is the time frame from the age of 35 on until menopause. Okay, so any woman, even if she is still able to bear children, is considered perimenopause from about the age of 35 until menopause. And menopause is actually an absence of menstrual cycles for 12 months. So you are not menopausal until after you've not had any type of menstrual cycle for at least 12 months. So you can have hot flashes, you can have night sweats, you can have all the symptoms. But if you have still been bleeding anytime in the past 12 months, you are still in perimenopause. You are not actually menopausal. But menopause is when the ovaries give up the responsibility of producing enough hormones to sustain pregnancy. And instead, your adrenal glands take over, producing minute amounts of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, these different hormones. Okay. But keep in mind that your adrenal glands also regulate cortisol. They also regulate the stress response. So if there's been chronic stress from any form of trauma, the adrenal glands are not going to be able to take over that responsibility well. And that is where a lot of the symptoms associated with perimenopause and menopause begin.
Okay, so let's say you're a woman, you really don't know that you are suffering from trauma. Because a
Yeah.
lot of us, we don't realize, obviously, because the whole idea is that you kind of shut it off. So how could we recognize that maybe we are experienced trauma, or we are hiding it somehow or not recognizing it? What are the symptoms that would show up in our life that would signal that, hey, maybe you have trauma that you need to deal with?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's important for people to understand that too little for too long aspect of trauma. Our culture is very high paced, very demanding, high expectations. We don't give our bodies a chance to recuperate from stress. We are always on, if you will. Okay. So there are people that may not experience a big T trauma, something that is typically associated with trauma. But there are very few women that make it to the perimenopause or menopausal years in the United States or any fast-paced culture, okay, that don't have the impact of chronic stress on their body. And so it'll show up in the hormones, okay? It will often show up as an inability to relax, okay? Or a sense of feeling wired but tired. You're exhausted, but you can't settle down. It will show up in the form of feeling the need to numb. Your brain is so overloaded, I'm just going to go scroll on Instagram for a half hour, or I'm going to binge watch Netflix.
I think you're like describing like 99%.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I think you're describing 99% of the women out there.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's because it is a lot more prevalent than what we realize, this
Mhm.
impact of the chronic stress or the trauma. So can show up in those forms. It can also show up as poor sleep, either having trouble falling asleep or waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, somewhere between midnight and 3, and your brain is going 100 miles per hour and you can't fall back asleep. That is very common. Low energy and need to depend on caffeine to get through your day. Okay, starting your day on coffee. That dependence on that to get through your day is a really good sign that your nervous system and your body is depleted. Your adrenal glands can't do what they need to do to restore your nervous system and move you out of that trauma. Also, keep in mind that there is, in our society, there's often this idea that we need to be cool, calm, and collected. So we go through something really stressful, and it is not acceptable to do what is necessary to get that trauma or that chronic stress out of your body. Okay. It's not acceptable to pace around the room like my 10-year-old nephew. It's like, sit down. Why are you still pacing? You're okay. It's okay. It's over. What is the problem? Okay. It's that mentality. So we suppress a lot of it in our bodies. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's say we listen to the symptoms of trauma and you're thinking, yeah, I maybe that's me. And I know you kind of explained how trauma happens. Is there an event or a series of not getting what you need that causes it? If the person is looking back on their life to figure out, okay, well, where is this trauma coming from? what would you say would be things to look for, causes of trauma that they should look for in their life?
You know what? I'm not a licensed healthcare professional, as far as being a counselor. So my first recommendation is that they would get that support as far as from a licensed counselor. I have training as far as integrative mental health, but I'm not a licensed counselor. So that's my first recommendation. It's like if you want to explore that more deeply in your past, do that with the support of somebody that is professionally trained in that area. For a lot of people, in order to cope, in order to survive and thrive, we have a tendency to minimize what we've gone through. Okay. We don't necessarily see it as being a big deal. Well, I don't even have anything to explore in my childhood. I don't have anything, even as an adult, that I need to deal with. You would be shocked at how often I am talking with a client and will ask them, have they had any trauma in their life? They're like, no, I have no trauma in my life. And then somewhere later in the conversation, I will learn things about them that are extremely traumatic. They never saw it as trauma because it was their normal life.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody suspects that there's trauma in their past, or if they suspect that their body is responding, maybe they have no idea what type of trauma they've been through, but they have the symptoms associated. They can connect with everything I just said. It may be time to either explore with a professional what maybe has gone on in their life that was traumatic, but they don't recognize it. Or it's time to take a really hard but difficult look at the chronic stress that they're probably still dealing with, that they've not been able to get out from underneath them, and it's keeping them in that fight or flight, hyper vigilant state, even if they don't have trauma in their past. Does that help? I would also say that there's a book that comes to mind by Andy Kolber called Try Softer. That is also an excellent reference resource for those that want to better understand how maybe their past or their current state of life is impacting their body now. It's an easy read. Right. That would be another resource that could be good.
Okay, so wow, that was just a lot of really great information. I was just wondering, as far as sure, we go see somebody that's a professional to help us deal with these issues of trauma. Is there anything else that you can tell us about healing or treating of trauma that you know of?
Yes. So it's great to have the awareness that maybe you have trauma or chronic stress in the past. It's great to be able to connect that with maybe some of the symptoms that you're dealing with now, but it's lousy information if you don't have any direction to resolve it. Creates more stress, creates more anxiety to know something and not be able to do anything about it. So there are a number of things that women can do to help their bodies. First of all, it's really important to understand that women are nurturers, okay? They are going to set aside by nature their own needs to take care of everybody else. But what's really interesting is that going into menopause, as estrogen levels begin to shift and change and drop, some of that nurturing tendencies will also begin to change. It's not that they're not nurturers any longer, but estrogen is the nurturing hormone. And so as those levels drop, they become maybe more aware of what they've been through, more like that second phase of like, I want to do something more with my life. Okay. You know what I'm talking about. All right. That's the point in life when a lot of women will become more aware of what maybe has happened in the past, and they are ready to start to take care of themselves. I will often tell my clients, you cannot pour from an empty glass. You cannot continue to nurture and take care of others if your glass is empty. It's the same with the oxygen mask on the plane. There's a reason why you put yours on before you put it on a child. And so sometimes at that age, right before menopause, they are finally ready to say, I get it. I know I need to do more. And so some of the things that I will tell women when they reach that point is, first of all, understand or be willing to acknowledge your own limitations. You can't be Superwoman. You can't do everything. And that need to constantly be on, that need to constantly be productive, to constantly be going, is actually an escape mechanism of your body from the chronic stress or the trauma. And so I will really encourage women to start the process of leaning into their limits, setting boundaries, setting a bedtime, being in bed by no later than 10 o'clock at night, making sure that you're off of all screens for at least 1 to 2 hours before bed, so that your brain can begin to decompress and you don't continue to suppress the melatonin, which is affected by blue light from screens and keeping you from sleeping. We need to start to set a consistent pattern with sleeping because that allows the body to heal. Getting outside into the sunlight earlier in the day, get that light into your eyes because it's going to help to set your energy for the day. Okay. Taking time to make sure that you surround yourself with people that can nurture you. If you are constantly pouring into everybody else, if every relationship in your life is draining, there is nothing left for you. And your hormones or your mood is going to begin to talk to you and complain that there is nothing left. I will also encourage women to begin becoming more familiar with their body, in the sense that we are sometimes very unaware of what our body is telling us. So just noticing, like, am I tired? Am I actually hungry, or am I just snacking out of boredom? Am I actually irritable because I am angry and my blood sugar levels have dropped and I need to be eating some protein? Becoming aware of what their body is trying to tell them. Why are they tired? Why are they irritable? All these different impacts of our day-to-day life that our body attempts to communicate, and we have a really hard time listening because we are so tuned in to everybody else around us, but we're ignoring ourselves. Those are some of the top things. I will also encourage women to begin maybe practicing some somatic or body-based exercises. That's probably beyond the scope of what we can talk about today, but somatic exercises or exercises that stimulate the vagus nerve can help your body begin to release the chronic stress or trauma that is stored deep in your tissue. So it's a very important part of the healing process for anybody, for women particularly, because they are body focused in the sense of like our appearance, if you will, but they're not in tune with how their body is talking to them.
Well, let me ask you, a lot of our listeners are probably postmenopausal women. So would that change, or would there be anything you would add as far as treating trauma in that situation? Because obviously then their hormone levels are way down.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think you would address it the same. I honestly don't think it would be any different. I would say that from a nutrient perspective, regardless of where they're at in life with their hormones, I would recommend adaptogenic herbs. Adaptogenic herbs are basically herbs that help your body adapt to stress. So an example that is fairly familiar to a lot of people would be ashwagandha. It's an herb that helps your body adapt. And so it takes some of that pressure off of just the body trying to do it all on its own. And it has a nurturing effect, if you will. Another example would be rhodiola. Another one is eleuthero. There are a number of different ones, but there is really no age that adaptogenic herbs are inappropriate for as an adult. So whether they are perimenopause, whether they're in the middle, or whether they're postmenopause, adaptogenic herbs, I feel, should be the foundation of every person's lifestyle, their day-to-day life, because it is so supportive to deal with the stress that we can't get away from. I would also say for postmenopausal women, exercise is incredibly important. Just 10 minutes of exercise after a meal can lower blood sugar levels. Now, obviously, more than 10 minutes would be good, but I just read a little blurb the other day that was saying that a 90-year-old person, okay, so we're talking about way beyond menopause, a 90-year-old person that takes I think it was a half-hour walk every day, as opposed to only 10 minutes, can actually add, or maybe it was 80 years old. Sorry, I'm interrupting myself. I think it was 80. They actually would add on to their life a number of years by just getting exercise every single day. And I was like, oh my word, if that's for an 80-year-old person, can you imagine what it's like for 50 or 60? So yes, exercise is very important. Being aware of the amount of sugar you're consuming, getting protein is important. If you have trouble sleeping at night, eating a little bit of protein before bed can be helpful. Lay off on the sugar in the evenings. Get your sugar earlier in the day if you're going to consume sugar. And do the protein small serving, like a handful of nuts or a boiled egg or something of that nature before bed at night. Can help to stabilize cortisol so that you will hopefully sleep better through the night. So lower your sugar intake, get exercise, use adaptogenic herbs, set and acknowledge your limitations, your boundaries, embrace the fact that we don't have to be Wonder Woman. We don't have to be Superwoman. It is okay
great advice.
to live up to that potential that God gives us, but not to exceed it because of our own expectations or our culture's expectations.
So what if you've had trauma, which all of us probably have to some extent? It's just a matter of severity, but you just ignore it. You don't do anything about it. What happens then?
Well, for some people, it will appear that nothing happens. The research, the studies that are being done now are finding that, for instance, somebody that experiences trauma in childhood is 25 times, I think it was 25 times more likely to experience asthma. 90% of those diagnosed with autoimmune disorders today have trauma in their background. Your risk of immune issues, of things like cancer, even heart disease, all of these begin to go up when there is unresolved stress in your life. I am not suggesting that somebody create more stress by dredging up or trying to find things in their childhood because they want to simply get it resolved because they're fearful now. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is if there is unresolved trauma, if you suspect, if you are suspicious, I wonder if I have some unresolved trauma from this, or this, taking the time to address it while it's hard in the beginning, it is going to allow your body to begin to heal. And for some women, they aren't going to heal until they can do that. But that's also chronic stress. If somebody has no trauma in their past that they know of, but they are living a crazy, stressful lifestyle right now, if they don't change, the potential for all of those health concerns begins to go up, unfortunately.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add as we're coming toward the end of our time here today? Anything else? Any other tidbit you want to give us?
That's a good question. I guess I would give some encouragement to all women out there that may be dealing with mood-related issues like anxiety or depression, or they're dealing with the hormone issues. They might be postmenopausal, but they're still having hot flashes, whatever it happens to be. Or maybe they just have terrible sleep or low energy or any number of different things. Okay. I just want to encourage them to not give up in pursuing answers, because there are answers. Sometimes we can package something like trauma up into this tidy box, and you either have it or you don't. And that's just not the case. But here's the thing. Just because somebody's had trauma, digging into your past and trying to resolve it all is not always the answer. If somebody suspects it, but they are fearful, that's like, I don't want to go back to that. Like, I don't want to go back and go through all those feelings or those emotions. Like, I feel overwhelmed just thinking about that. That's okay. You don't always have to dredge up the past in order to resolve the trauma of your past. Remember, the trauma has been stored in your body. We need to find a way to release it from the body. And you don't have to do that always by exploring all of your thoughts and emotions and suppressed memories. It is not always necessary. For some, they're going to need that for resolution, and that's not wrong. But I would never want someone to be fearful of resolving trauma or chronic stress because they don't want to address the past. And so they'd rather just go on dealing with their symptoms than take care of what caused it. There are other ways, and sometimes more effective ways, at helping someone get rid of that trauma in their body, release that trauma through somatic exercises or other body-based practices without needing to go through it all in your mind. So I think that'd be my biggest encouragement. I don't want women to be scared away from healing their body because of that. So if that is something that creates fear, there are other ways to do it. It's a matter of addressing the body, the physical body, and allowing the body to release it and helping to retrain the body to recognize that it's safe now. It might not have been safe at some point in the past, but it is safe now. And so we just need to retrain, if you will.
Well, thank you for that, Rachel. Ellie, is there anything else you want to add?
No, this was really a great time. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share. Obviously, it's a very passionate topic for me. So thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, we want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. And it would be great to have you come back at another time and talk to us some more about trauma. And wow, we would be so grateful for that. Could you share your website and Facebook addresses with our audience just before we all go?
Sure. So my website is arrowwellness.com. So arrow is spelled E-I-R-O. So arrow is an old Greek word that means God's gift of wholeness. So it originates from erin, which is like the word that we think of in the Bible as peace. So it's a derivative, an old Greek derivative of that. So arrow is E-I-R-O. So arrowwellness.com is my website. And you can find me under the same name on Facebook and Instagram, just Arrow Wellness.
Well, that's perfect. Okay, well, I think we can be finished for today. Thanks again. God bless you.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Join the Jesus People Sisterhood Community Facebook group. Please share any thoughts that resonated with you from today's podcast episode in our private Facebook community. Start reaching out to other single women and create your local group of Jesus People Sisters. And let us know about your group, and we will start a directory of Jesus People Sisterhood groups. Contact us at support@JesusPeopleSisterhood.com.
Have you had a good experience with a business? They've treated you honestly and helped you at a reasonable price. Please let us know. We would like to start a directory of JPS-friendly businesses to direct other sisters to. Let's care for one another.
That's all we have for today, sisters. Be blessed by him who is able to protect you from stumbling and to make you stand in the presence of his glory, blameless and with great joy.
Hey, sister, before you go, thank you for listening. If you found value in today's podcast, the best way to say thank you is by leaving a 5-star written review at Apple Podcasts. That raises us in the rankings and helps other sisters find us too. And please tell a friend or post it on your social media. If you're a single Christian woman over 50, this podcast was created specifically for you. The Jesus People Sisterhood is your community. to find support and friendship with other sisters who can understand. Be sure to follow us on your podcast app and join our free private Facebook group at Jesus People Sisterhood Community.
Jesus People Sisterhood has also started a private Facebook group for housing and co-living opportunities. You can check that out at Jesus People Sisterhood Senior Housing. You can also find us on Facebook at Jesus People Sisterhood and individually for Janine at riseupcoachingandconsulting.com and for Ellie at samaramountain.com. And ladies, this is the necessary disclaimer. Our podcast content is for informational purposes and does not constitute professional advice for mental health, medical, legal, financial, or other areas. The opinions of the guest do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the hosts. It is our heart that this podcast will be a blessing to you. Together, let's build a powerful sisterhood with Jesus. Make a friend, add a sister, across the border and around the world.